Tonight on 24, Washington says Iran wants a deal under U.S. strikes.
Iran very much continues to talk to the United States of America and express that they want to make a deal with us because they are suffering.
The White House spokesperson issued a stern warning, declaring that any hostile attacks in the strategic Strait of Hormuz won't go unanswered. This comes amid reports of the Islamic Republic of Iran requesting Houthi forces to be ready in the Red Sea. A source close to the Houthis said the group has already deployed missiles and drones near the Bab al-Mandab Strait, awaiting their final operational command. Meanwhile, reports of explosions have echoed across Kuwait, Qatar, and Jordan. Regional leaders warned that these hostile attacks directly violate the sovereignty of these peaceful nations and will undoubtedly fuel the flames of a devastating regional war. And the formation of a high committee in Iraq to investigate the smuggling of missiles and drones to Syria. Damascus says the final destination was Hezbollah. From the Iran International Studio, this is 24 with Fardad Farahzad. Hello, and a very good day to all of our Iran International viewers tuning in from Iran and across the globe. Just a few moments ago, White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt confirmed during a press briefing that the Islamic Republic remains in active discussions with the United States in pursuit of a new agreement. Leavitt emphasized that Tehran is facing intense pressure to negotiate, particularly in the wake of recent actions, which she characterized as devastating military strikes conducted by the United States forces. During her briefing, Ms. Leavitt emphasized that the recent U.S. military strikes were carried out in direct response to what Washington considers a clear violation of the bilateral Memorandum of Understanding by the Islamic Republic. Concurrently, Reuters reported, citing three knowledgeable sources, that Tehran has requested Yemen's Houthi forces to stand ready to block the vital Red Sea oil transit route should the U.S. attack Iran's energy and power infrastructure. According to an insider source close to the Houthis, the rebel group has actively deployed advanced missiles and kamikaze drones near the strategic Bab al-Mandab Strait, where they are currently waiting for the official order to commence this disruptive operation.
Very much continues to talk to the United
Iran is still seriously in talks with the U.S. and has said it wants to reach an agreement with us because it has come under pressure following the devastating strikes it suffered from the U.S. military. The reason for the recent attacks over the past few days, which the American people need to understand, is that Iran violated the Memorandum of Understanding it had signed with us. Under this agreement, they were not supposed to fire at commercial ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz, but unfortunately they did. President Trump won't allow these terrorist acts in the Strait of Hormuz to continue. Look at their bad behavior. The reason that triggered the start of Operation Epic Fury. Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon. That's why the president launched Operation Epic Fury. President Trump is always ready and willing for diplomacy.
Joining us live from downtown Washington, D.C., is my colleague Amir Diti. Amir, Ms. Leavitt claims that the Iranians are actively looking for a diplomatic deal under U.S. strikes. However, we don't hear such a narrative coming out of Tehran, and this new Reuters report paints a very different picture, indicating that Iran is actually preparing itself for much larger conflicts.
Look, Fardad, that is precisely the point Ms. Leavitt made when she was responding to one of the reporters. She explained that following the strategic U.S. military strikes, the Islamic Republic is no longer the highly centralized, powerful terrorist regime it was prior to these targeted operations. Essentially, they have completely lost their former concentration of power. She highlighted that the regime has fractured into distinct factions. Some of these groups are eager to negotiate a deal and are likely engaging in back-channel discussions with American officials behind the scenes. Conversely, other factions strongly oppose any agreement. Crucially, due to the disruptive impact of the U.S. strikes, these disparate groups now lack the necessary communication channels to coordinate with one another, demonstrating that the Islamic Republic's centralized authority and concentration of power have been almost entirely dismantled. She pointed out the reason for the strikes President Trump carried out against the Islamic Republic's positions, saying this is a kind of punishment because they had come and signed a memorandum of understanding promising not to attack commercial ships intending to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. But contrary to what they had signed, they went and attacked the ships. So we are ready. We've placed a naval blockade on the Islamic Republic's ports. All ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz, if they don't intend to go to Iran's southern ports, to travel there, they can do so now. The Strait of Hormuz is open to them. But otherwise, for ships that intend to go to the Islamic Republic's ports in southern Iran, we are there with 20 of our warships, as well as hundreds of our fighter jets, and we won't allow it. One of the reporters even asked about the situation in Iran, saying, "How is it that Mr. Trump is talking to a government that is still carrying out executions in prisons?" But Ms. Levitt didn't give a clear answer to that reporter's question. On the other hand, she referred to some news about disagreements. Anyway, there were comments that Mr. Vance, J.D. Vance, made yesterday. She said no, Mr. Trump and Mr. Vance are exactly on the same page regarding their decisions on Iran, and the Islamic Republic can't do these things. In response to a question about the attacks the Islamic Republic carried out on Erbil, Iraq, she said, well, these things that are happening, these attacks being carried out in that region on President Trump's orders against the Islamic Republic's positions, one of the reasons is precisely these actions by the Islamic Republic, and these are punitive measures. But at the same time, she said that despite all these events and the attacks that have been carried out, a part of the Islamic Republic wants a deal and is trying to make it happen. But then, on the other hand, according to news reaching Reuters from 3 sources, the Islamic Republic has asked the Houthis to go there and cause some trouble for shipping in Bab al-Mandab. We know that Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the UAE transport their oil through there. But what happened is, Reuters had another piece of news too. Reuters said that Pakistani security sources pointed out, through a source, that they have given a red line to the Islamic Republic. Furthermore, they explicitly stated that any military attacks on Saudi Arabia represent an absolute red line, warning that an aggression against Saudi territory would be treated as a direct attack on Pakistan itself. This declaration carries immense weight because Pakistan has historically acted as a crucial diplomatic mediator throughout these complex regional negotiations. This newly established red line, which a Reuters source reports has been firmly communicated to the Islamic Republic of Iran, could ultimately prove to be a decisive factor in the ongoing conflict resolution efforts. In related developments, press spokesperson Ms. Levitt confirmed that President Donald Trump is scheduled to deliver a highly anticipated address tonight at 9 p.m., where he is expected to discuss these escalating geopolitical tensions and the strategic implications for international security. Furthermore, in addition to addressing Donald Trump's perspective on the highly anticipated upcoming U.S. presidential elections, a significant portion of those remarks will also focus deeply on the ongoing Iran issue, specifically highlighting the recent military strikes targeted against the Islamic Republic and their regional impact.
Thank you, Amir Gidi, from downtown Washington, D.C., and we will definitely keep our eyes on the White House tonight to see what the president says about Iran. We have breaking news. CENTCOM has announced that U.S. forces, starting at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, which is about half an hour ago, have launched a new wave of strikes aimed at further degrading Iran's military capabilities. These strikes are a continuation of the operations over the past few nights against targets in Iran. Iranian media have also reported a new attack on areas in Bandar Abbas, among other places. Mizan news agency, the judiciary's media outlet, said 3 explosions were heard in western Bandar Abbas. Ali Sadrazadeh, Middle East analyst, is with us from Frankfurt. Mr. Sadrazadeh, I know that the Americans, as Ms. Levitt said, still hope that under these pressures, Tehran might return to the negotiating table, but what we are seeing on the ground seems to be an escalation of tensions. From these very strikes that started half an hour ago in western Bandar Abbas, to the Houthis being on standby in the Red Sea to close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait.
That is absolutely correct, and it precisely explains why the current level of political rhetoric and regional tensions has escalated so dramatically. In response to these growing threats, Saudi Arabia has just released an official statement strongly condemning Iran's destabilizing activities. Meanwhile, as your reporter noted, Pakistani officials are increasingly worried that Houthi rebels will become deeply entangled in this conflict. This fear is well-founded. Just 30 minutes ago, Houthi leader Abdul Malik al-Houthi delivered a fiery speech warning of direct retaliation, promising blockade for blockade, port strike for port strike, and threatening all critical Saudi Arabian facilities. He then formally announced that highly sophisticated missiles have been positioned and are fully prepared for deployment on the strategic heights directly overlooking the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. According to his statement, the ultimate decision to launch these weapons rests entirely in the hands of the Revolutionary Guards and the high-ranking IRGC officers stationed on the ground there. And apparently, that particular plane that the Saudi coalition forces refused to allow to land at Sana'a International Airport on Monday, prompting them to repeatedly bomb the airport runway so that the aircraft was forced to divert and land in Hodeidah, which, as everyone knows, remains under direct Houthi control. There was much meant for Houthi rebel fighters on board. That is apparently the main reason why Saudi Arabia went to such extreme lengths and ultimately prevented this plane from coming in and landing at the Sana'a airport. When we take a step back and examine the comprehensive picture painted by these complex stories, a vastly different narrative emerges, one that sharply contradicts the official testimony and perspective recently presented by Ms. Levitt in Washington. While it is certainly plausible that specific reformist or pragmatic individuals within the apparatus of the Islamic Republic have discreetly sent back-channel signals to the United States expressing a desire for diplomatic negotiations, this does not represent a unified front. Indeed, serious doubts remain regarding whether the United States is dealing with a cohesive, singular voice in Tehran. The internal political landscape of Iran is deeply fragmented, characterized by intense rivalries between hardline factions and moderate elements, suggesting that any diplomatic outreach is highly contested rather than a reflection of a consolidated nationwide consensus.
Mr. Sadadi, there's no doubt that the U.S. military is the strongest, largest military in the world, with immense capability as we see it goes and strikes from Semnan to Bandar Abbas, almost without any meaningful air defense opposition. But the Islamic Republic also seems to hold two major levers. One is the Strait of Hormuz, and now increasingly probably Bab al-Mandab. Just digesting the insecurity in the Strait of Hormuz has been a very difficult task for the global economy, if not impossible. If they really want to make the Red Sea insecure as well, is this an environment that the US, the world, and international trade can tolerate?
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. This scenario is highly unlikely because the strategic Saudi East-West pipeline, which serves as a primary alternative to the volatile Strait of Hormuz, transports a massive volume of crude oil directly to the Red Sea hordes. If any hostile force attempts to disrupt this flow by shutting down the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, I am absolutely certain that Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United States will immediately intervene with decisive military force. While the ultimate escalation of such a conflict remains highly unpredictable, these global powers simply cannot afford to let this vital maritime choke point close. Indeed, a blockade that would paralyze international shipping, send global energy markets into absolute chaos, and trigger an immediate, overwhelming international response. The entire world will be under an almost complete encirclement by the IRGC and the Houthis. The entire world. And that is why I doubt even the Europeans would allow it. So I don't think so. And for now, maybe the hope is that the tensions remain at the level of justice rhetoric. Furthermore, it is crucial that the Houthi rebels consistently refrain from launching any hostile actions against Saudi Arabia. This highlights a fascinating geopolitical dynamic. Despite the Islamic Republic of Iran targeting various Persian Gulf nations, it has conspicuously avoided direct aggression towards Saudi Arabia. This calculated restraint stems from Iran's awareness of Pakistan's stance. Pakistan has clearly established Saudi Arabia's security as a strict red line. Consequently, Iran carefully avoids crossing this boundary to ensure it keeps Pakistan strategically aligned, or at least neutral on its side.
Thank you, Ali Sadadi, Middle East analyst, joining us from Frankfurt, Germany. Kuwait and Bahrain announced that on Thursday they were once again targeted by a new wave of Iranian attacks. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Jordan condemned the Islamic Republic's attacks on U.S. bases in Bahrain and Kuwait, calling them a clear violation of these countries' sovereignty and international law. Riyadh says these attacks are unjustifiable, and that it will stand by the countries of the region. Jordan has also called for preventing the escalation of tensions, emphasizing the continuation of talks and advancing the diplomatic path. Mariam reports Arab countries' tolerance is running out after repeated protests.
Absolutely. Fardad, you have hit the nail on the head. It increasingly appears that the collective patience of various nations throughout the Middle East is rapidly wearing thin. According to recent investigative reports emerging from media outlets with close ties to the Persian Gulf governments, there is a noticeable shift in diplomatic strategy. These regional sources reveal that the Arab Gulf states have actively ceased their traditional appeals for restraint and de-escalation, representing a stark contrast to their diplomatic behavior observed during previous conflicts, and they are practically condemning it and are fed up with this situation, with these attacks that the Islamic Republic is carrying out. And now they say that the Islamic Republic is only looking to violate their country's territorial sovereignty. The Islamic Republic comes out and says it's attacking US bases, whereas it's actually targeting the infrastructure of these countries. And it also wants to disrupt energy export routes, both in the Red Sea and in the Strait of Hormuz, where this has already happened, and now ships cannot pass. We know that in its latest wave of attacks, the Islamic Republic targeted Bahrain, Kuwait, and Jordan with its missiles and drones. Tehran says these attacks were on US military bases, but we clearly observe that these hostile attacks have provoked a sharp defensive reaction from various foreign governments, including several nations that have not yet been directly targeted. Neighboring countries within the region argue that the Islamic Republic's aggression is not limited merely to Bahrain and Kuwait. Instead, they fear a much broader security threat, warning that at any given moment, these hostile forces might decide to actively target their own sovereign territories as well. Bahrain and Kuwait announced that their military defense systems successfully intercepted most of the Islamic Republic's attacks, and they considered these actions by the Islamic Republic a clear violation of their national sovereignty. The UAE and Qatar also issued formal statements condemning Iran's attacks, calling them a direct threat to the security and stability of the entire region. The countries in the region strongly emphasize that attacks on their territory, regardless of what specific targets they are actually aiming at, represent an unacceptable escalation of geopolitical tension. These hostile actions pose a direct and severe threat to the collective security of the entire Persian Gulf region. Saudi Arabia has strongly condemned these destabilizing attacks, which target critical maritime corridors. Meanwhile, here at the UN headquarters, discussions with diplomats reveal that anxieties are mounting rapidly. There is a deep growing fear that the Islamic Republic of Iran intends to strategically employ Houthi forces to disrupt international shipping, render key Red Sea trade routes entirely unsafe, or completely block the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait, a vital global choke point for energy and commerce. Currently, these intense diplomatic pressures are actively playing out within the chambers of the United Nations, a strategic coalition of Persian Gulf nations working in close coordination with the United States is leveraging international forums to isolate Iran. This diplomatic offensive has received a significant boost from Bahrain, which recently secured an influential non-permanent seat on the UN Security Council. By utilizing this powerful global platform, these allied nations aim to draft new resolutions, initiate rigorous debates, and implement stricter international oversight, thereby intensifying the multilateral pressure on the Islamic Republic to address critical security concerns and ensure long-term regional peace.
Thank you, Mariam Rahmati, joining us from the UN headquarters in New York. Joining us now from Riyadh is Masoud Al-Fat, a prominent Middle East analyst. Mr. Al-Fat, we have systematically observed how these Arab Gulf nations, bolstered heavily by Bahrain's active role as a current non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, have exhausted various diplomatic avenues. They have utilized intense pressure, strategic alliances, and diplomatic channels with influential regional players like Pakistan to persuade Tehran to refrain from targeting their territories and strategic assets. Yet despite these concerted efforts, the strategy appears ineffective. The moment Iran perceives a threat, it retaliates against these nations' critical interests. This persistent vulnerability raises a crucial question. Is there a definitive turning point on the horizon where this security equation will fundamentally shift, perhaps towards stronger military deterrence or new alliances? Or will these Gulf states severely rely on diplomatic maneuvers until the very last moment to decide the ongoing threat?
Hello to you, and a very warm welcome to all your viewers joining us today. I strongly believe that the GCC countries, Jordan, and several other Arab nations that actively oppose these ongoing attacks will do everything in their power, right up until the very last moment, to avoid being dragged into a wider regional conflict. Many of these nations understand that once they are pulled into such a destabilizing war, it is entirely unpredictable where, when, and how it will ultimately end. Consequently, these sovereign states, which have strategically focused all of their national investments on economic development, technological progress, and long-term prosperity, are deeply concerned about the devastating impact this issue could have. Historically, entering into a complex geopolitical conflict is remarkably simple and straightforward, yet extricating oneself from the resulting fallout always demands at least double the diplomatic and military effort to bring the hostilities to a definitive close. Despite understanding these immense risks, all of the involved countries have continuously emphasized a singular crucial point. They reserve the absolute right to respond to any direct threats or violations of their sovereignty. Meanwhile, across the Arab world and the wider regional press, commentators have highlighted a glaring contradiction in the official narratives. They argue that if Iran's frequent claims of targeting including United States military bases situated within these nations, were actually true, the sheer volume of these alleged Haas strikes means those physical facilities should have been completely obliterated, leaving absolutely no trace of them standing today. Furthermore, regional leaders strongly emphasize that no military operations or hostile attacks have ever been launched from the coalition bases located within their sovereign borders against Iranian territory. Consequently, they dismiss Iran's accusations as unfounded allegations, viewing them merely as a convenient pretext or excuse designed to justify potential strikes against their critical domestic infrastructure, such as energy plants and transport networks. In response to these rising tensions, Arab nations are excited to exhaust all diplomatic channels. They will likely focus their efforts on initiating constructive dialogue and high-level talks. However, they insist that these negotiations must transcend mere rhetoric and deliver concrete, actionable results that guarantee long-term security and lasting stability across the region.
As we speak, live ship tracking in the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman reveals a massive concentration of vessels, particularly tankers, stalled near Corfacon and Fujairah on the eastern side of the Strait of Hormuz, while another cluster is positioned further west near Dubai. Conversely, maritime traffic between the borders of Oman and Iran appears virtually inactive. During past attacks by the Islamic Republic against Gulf nations, Saudi Arabia has remained relatively safer compared to the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, and even mediator Oman. However, it seems that Iran is now prepared to reactivate the Houthis. Mr. Al-Faq, if the Houthis make a meaningful entry into this conflict, do you believe Riyadh will be forced to become much more active, and are we likely to see a significant escalation in the exchange of fire between Iran and Saudi Arabia?
در جریان این حملاتی که جمهوری اسلامی به کشورهای حاشیه خلیج فارس کرد، به استثنای موارد اندکی، تقریبا عربستان سعودی مسئول‌تر بوده در مقایسه با امارات متحده عربی، کویت و حتی قطر و یک میانجیگری مثل عمان. اما به نظر میسه که الان جمهوری اسلامی آماده است که حوثی ها رو دوباره فعال بکنه. آیا به نظر شما در صورت ورود معنادار حوثی ها به جنگ، ریاض هم ناچار خواهد شد که بیشتر فعال بشه و احتمالاً تبادل آتش بین ایران و عربستان بالا میگیره؟
Look, when we closely examine the strategic involvement of the Houthi movement, even though no official declarations have been made by the parties involved, reports from prominent international media outlets, most notably Reuters, strongly suggest a dangerous escalation. If the Islamic Republic of Iran decides to take such a provocative step, it will inevitably drag the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia into a direct, highly volatile confrontation. This escalation would immediately shatter years of delicate diplomatic efforts aimed at maintaining regional peace. The threat is incredibly serious because the Houthis have repeatedly warned that they are prepared to target multiple nations across the Middle East and, crucially, completely block the Bab al-Mandab Strait. Closing this vital maritime choke point under current global economic conditions would immediately trigger the formation of a powerful, united international coalition. Major global powers that stand to suffer massive economic and supply chain disruptions, such as China, which relies heavily on Middle Eastern oil, India, and various European nations dependent on steady maritime trade routes, would be forced to take a decisive stand. They would likely exert overwhelming pressure on Tehran to back out. Ultimately, utilizing the Houthis in this manner appears to be the Islamic Republic's final high-stakes card in its geopolitical standoff. Unfortunately, the troubling signs and preliminary groundwork for this exact scenario seem to have already been laid, signaling a very precarious future for global commerce.
Thank you, Masood Al-Faq, Middle East analyst, joining us from Riyadh. Energy experts say the oil crisis is not limited to the war with Iran and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and pressure on Russian refineries has also pushed the market into a supply shortage. According to these experts, Russian refinery activity has decreased by about 500,000 barrels per day in a week, and Russian diesel exports have dropped to almost zero. Experts say observable oil inventories in global onshore storages, excluding China, have reached their lowest recorded level. Along with the increase in military conflict between the US and the Islamic Republic, ship traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has also dropped sharply, so much so that on Wednesday only 13 commercial ships passed through this waterway. Marzia Hosseini joins us from Congress to discuss Trump's claims of U.S. oil self-sufficiency.
ترامپ میگه که آمریکا تا اندازه زیادی بی‌نیاز هست، صادرکننده نفت از خودش، ونزوئلا رو هم الان در دست داره، ولی این فشارهای بازار انرژی در سراسر جهان داره احساس میشه.
It seems actually every other country except the US is talking more about this issue than here. For example, here in Congress, in these conditions of oil shortage and global markets and all, they gathered yesterday and said the late Lindsey Graham really wanted us to put 100% sanctions on this country buying Russian oil. Let's pass these sanctions now in his memory, for instance. Well, if they do that, Russian oil supply will practically decrease in these wartime conditions, in this very situation where we know, according to to reports, only 13 ships passed through the Strait of Hormuz despite the start of the blockade. And slowly, the situation is getting back to how it was a few months ago, meaning a global oil supply shortage. However, aside from the growing concerns surrounding this issue, right here in the U.S. Congress, at this exact moment, lawmakers are actively negotiating a complex budget reconciliation package. Through this legislative maneuver, they are attempting to allocate $95 billion directly to the Pentagon. To put it quite simply, they are doing this without the necessary consensus or permission from the Democrats, ensuring the military can sustain its ongoing operations regarding Iran. This urgent workaround became necessary because last Tuesday, the Pentagon failed to pass its massive defense budget, which exceeds $1 trillion, due to strong Democratic opposition over this specific conflict. This blockade forced the hands of congressional Republicans, who are now utilizing a reconciliation process to bypass traditional hurdles. This strategic push follows a quiet, unannounced visit last night by Senator J.D. Vance, who slid into the Capitol to meet privately with key lawmakers. Vance spent hours persuading skeptical representatives to approve this critical funding, which the Pentagon desperately requires to maintain its geopolitical stance. Interestingly, reports indicate that out of this $95 billion package, approximately $73 billion is earmarked directly for defense, while the remaining billions have been cleverly packaged as subsidies for American farmers, a tactical addition designed to secure crucial votes and ensure passage in the coming days. As Vance concluded his high-stakes meetings, his brief but highly significant exchange with reporters at the congressional exit hinted at the intense political pressure building behind closed doors, and expressed some views regarding the war with Iran, which I saw he repeated in today's podcast interview as well. He said, "We are not sending 150,000 people to change the regime in Iran." He said, "This is not our job at all. It's the job of the people in Iran." And overall, he made some remarks, along with his podcast today, that the American media are heavily criticizing. They say, is J.D. Vance talking so much about negotiation because his entire argument is based on negotiation, while we see Trump has started the countdown to attacking energy facilities? They say how different their words are from each other. Do they really have different views, or is J.D. Vance very strategically trying to actually lift the burden of this war off his own shoulders? In this situation, I also did an interview with Democratic U.S. Senator Booker. Let's watch that.
In my opinion, this entire situation is completely absurd and meaningless, as Donald Trump stubbornly insists on continuing a failed war. He has thrown the global economy into deep chaos, and as a result, everyday Americans are hurting from rapidly rising gas and food prices. Furthermore, billions of precious taxpayer dollars are being spent on a conflict that has neither a coherent strategy nor clear objectives. We are now trapped in a very real, painful crisis entirely of his own making.
The final point I want to emphasize is an analysis published by the Washington Post today, which raises some highly compelling points regarding modern foreign policy. Directly addressing Donald Trump, the article warns, do not rush so quickly to negotiate a deal with the Islamic Republic, because you are destined to fail. Instead, the piece advises letting the United States military, as the most powerful force in the world, do its job, while allowing the Islamic Republic, as one of the world's most failing and fragile regimes, to slowly accept its own weakness and inevitable defeat over time. To illustrate this, the author recalls a historical precedent from the 1990s, when the U.S. Secretary of State was attempting to broker peace in the Middle East, and key regional players were playing hard to get. He famously stated, "Here is the White House phone number. I am leaving. Whenever you are serious about peace, call us." The Post suggests Trump should adopt this exact strategy today. Instead of constantly posting on social media, he should allow the Islamic Republic to resolve the deep political hypocrisy currently fracturing its leadership. Whenever they are genuinely ready for a real deal, they must approach the U.S. themselves. This tactic is known in diplomatic negotiation policy as dynamic silence. Trump should employ this now because, as media outlets confirm and Trump himself claims, the Islamic Republic's nuclear capabilities have been severely compromised, leaving them with virtually no pathway to build a bomb. Economically, they will be completely broken in a very short period. If they possess any wisdom, they will eventually have no choice but to return to the U.S. government on American terms.
Thank you, Marzia Hosseini, our correspondent from the U.S. Congress. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance says this country will not send ground troops for regime change in Iran, and the fate of the Islamic Republic must be decided by the Iranians themselves. Speaking on the Joe Rogan podcast, Mr. Vance warned of a repeat of the Libya scenario, saying that the collapse of Iran could trigger a massive wave of migration, violence, and terrorism. Vance also revealed a foreign-funded campaign to derail negotiations with Tehran, emphasizing that Washington's goal should be to reach a deal that both prevents Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons and guarantees the free flow of oil and gas.
Ultimately, if the citizens of Iran decide they want to rise up and change their own government, that is entirely their sovereign decision to make. However, the United States is absolutely not going to send 150,000 American ground troops to enforce an external regime change. This is especially true if the local population on the ground does not actively strive for such an outcome themselves. In any case, we are simply not deploying troops. When critics suggest putting boots on the ground, they are basically arguing that the US military should step in and do the Iranian people's work for them. We do not do that anymore. We really don't. They attack us and say we are under the influence of Qatar or foreign governments, or that we take our orders from Tucker Carlson. A lot of nonsense is being said, while I am actually trying to do exactly what the President of the United States asked me to do, to reach a deal that achieves our goals, that Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons and the free flow of oil and gas is maintained. I have to be clear that I really don't have a problem if some elements in the Israeli government want to criticize the deal or disagree with it. I don't even have a problem with attempts to exert influence. Foreign governments always try to influence the United States. Israel does it, and other countries do it too. That's part of the nature of international relations. What bothers me is when American leaders, allow such influence to affect their judgment and the positions they advocate for. That really upsets me.
Joining us live from Los Angeles is Arish Aramish, a prominent legal scholar and national security analyst. Mr. Aramish, keeping in mind the diplomatic boundaries of what a high-ranking U.S. official can state, Senator Vance's recent commentary has been exceptionally critical of Israel. In your expert opinion, does this reflect a genuine strategic shift in the Trump administration's policy, or is it simply a calculated maneuver aimed at domestic voters as Vance eyes the next election cycle?
Ultimately, Mr. Vance's election campaign for the 2028 presidency has already commenced, and he is 100% positioning himself against his chief potential rival, Mr. Rubio. Mr. Rubio strongly advocates for a highly dynamic, active foreign policy. He remains an incredibly close friend of Israel, firmly believes the oppressed Iranian people must finally be freed, and served as a key architect behind the maximum pressure strategy and subsequent direct actions against the Islamic Republic. On the other side of this issue stands Mr. Vance. Of course, it is worth noting that Mr. Vance does not possess any particularly grand or unwavering principles of his own. I will get to that point shortly. He acts much more like an unprincipled opportunist than a leader who follows a specific, coherent political philosophy. Why? Because during that same 2016 election cycle, he famously critiqued Mr. Trump, even going so far as to privately compare him to America's Hitler. Yet just a few years later, he gladly became his vice presidential running mate on the campaign ticket. Ultimately, we really should not expect Mr. Vance to be deeply attached or committed to any particular political principle. I constantly point out that the far left is deeply embarrassed by American foreign policy. They seem genuinely ashamed to live in a strong first world superpower. Rather than celebrating the fact that the United States proudly stands as the world's dominant leading force, they cringe at our global influence. Instead of supporting democratic partners, they routinely lash out at key US allies, like Israel, holding them to unfair standards. Ultimately, their entire worldview boils down to a simplistic, self-loathing narrative. They truly believe that almost every single evil and conflict in the world is entirely America's fault. Vance falls on this side of the issue. I say the far right, but they say they're not worth it at all, meaning from a snobbish, maybe superior standpoint, like we are better than them. Why are these brown-haired people worth us going and bringing 100,000 soldiers for them? That's how he looks at it. Both the far left and the far right are deeply isolationist. Under the skin of both political extremes, you can easily detect a troubling amount of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiment, just as some far-right extremists align with radical groups like the Proud Boys, or that hostile crowd that marches through city streets lighting torches in Nazi uniforms. Others take a different approach. For instance, Mr. Tucker Carlson literally promotes weird conspiracy theories targeting Israel and Jewish people. Meanwhile, Miss Marjorie Taylor Greene, who served as a representative from Georgia and eventually resigned over her intense disagreement with Mr. Trump regarding the Epstein scandal, showcases similar patterns, but the broader implications of this growing political phenomenon remain deeply, fundamentally polarizing. Among the exquisite remarks of this conspiracy theorist lady, She would say, for example, that Jewish people can change the weather, or she was worried about being attacked by Jewish space lasers. Remember that this joke became a famous joke? Nonsense talk that, by the way, some of those paranoid Uncle Napoleon Iranians also really like. It's conspiracy theories, when you want to quickly simplify very complex things and say, yes, it's all this person's fault, it's all that person's fault. In any case, Mr. Vance falls into the realm of the right that basically says America first, but he defines this America first in a way that is practically against America's national interests, that the United States shouldn't make dynamic use of its military power, its diplomatic power, and the influence it has, and practically roll out the red carpet for Putin, Qatar, and the rest, and tomorrow it could be, why not? Mr. Vance might genuinely believe he can broker a grand deal with the ruling regime of the Islamic Republic of Iran. However, this perspective betrays a fundamental and profound misunderstanding of today's geopolitical realities. While you might successfully negotiate and get along reasonably well with transactional partners like the Emir of Qatar, Mr. Vance, the radical anti-Western ideologues in Tehran operate under an entirely different paradigm. If you naively roll out the red carpet for Sayyid Mujtaba Khamenei or extend diplomatic gestures to hardline IRGC commanders, they will gladly exploit your goodwill. They might step on that carpet initially, but the very moment they get a chance, they'll burn it, roll it up, hit you over the head with it, and relentlessly use it against America. The Islamic Republic is inherently and by nature a savage regime that opposes regional order and stability. This is what exporting the revolution means. Exporting the revolution means exactly this, disrupting stability. That's why, if they don't do something about it now, in a few years they will have to pay the price themselves. But the best solution, and you've seen Mr. Trump, sometimes he listens to Rubio, sometimes he listens to Vance. Unfortunately, Mr. Vance is also sometimes getting foreign policy advice from people who were close buddies of Rob Malley, and who are also accused lobbying for the Islamic Republic and accused of being in bed with the Islamic Republic. And even them, it's gotten really weird. I say the far left and the far right are two sides of the same coin, and here the likes of the late Mr. Lindsey Graham are missed, or the late John McCain is missed, or the late Joseph Lieberman from the Democratic Party is missed. But there are others like Mr. John Fetterman from the Democratic Party, Mr. Tom Cotton from the Republican Party. The United States must have a dynamic foreign policy, especially against second and third-rate dictatorships. I'm surprised that for all this time, you still allow the Islamic Republic to use this Strait of Hormuz waterway. To defeat the Islamic Republic, we must destroy their military barracks and judicial complexes completely. They only understand the language of violence. While Donald Trump is often reluctant to wage war and prefers making deals, his decisive actions like killing Soleimani and targeting regime leaders were highly effective. However, this aggressive pressure must be continuously sustained.
This inherent unpredictability is precisely what makes interpreting Donald Trump's potential cabinet choices so incredibly challenging for analysts. As you previously noted, there is a stark ideological divide between figures like Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance. For instance, regardless of one's political views on Joe Biden, his administration maintained a predictable, institutionalized foreign policy. The same clarity existed under George W. Bush, whose neoconservative agenda clearly defined the global war on terror. In contrast, Mr. Trump's circle contains two deeply polarized competing factions: the traditional hawks who advocate for maximum pressure and intervention, and the populist realists who favor isolationism and avoiding costly foreign conflicts. In your personal estimation and analysis, which of these contradictory factions will ultimately dominate Trump's foreign policy agenda and dictate the United States strategy toward the Islamic Republic of Iran? Will the hawkish Rubio camp or the non-interventionist Vance faction prevail?
That's a very good and tough question, and it depends on what the outcome is. When they shot down the F-15, the Marco Rubio faction lost some of its power, and the J.D. Vance faction's argument carried more weight. Why? Because Mr. Trump said, oh, if we start taking casualties now, if the war drags on longer than this, and he was also getting reports that after all, this war might get tougher, and so on and so forth. But if, on the contrary, the military operation yields results and the military operation can achieve the desired outcome, then the faction of, let me tell you, Mr. Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, and Mike Waltz, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, their word will carry weight. There's another thing about Mr. Trump, which is that he himself isn't really a man of principle either. He doesn't believe in any particular philosophy. He sees where his interest lies, and he wants to be on the winning side. The way they are fighting, waffling back and forth, I don't know if it will lead to any specific result. If you want to get results, you have to take Harg, you have to take the 3 islands, you have to create a buffer zone from Chabar to Bandar Abbas. Does it cost? Yes, it costs. You have to break the back of the Islamic Republic. This is no way to fight a war. This is no way to fight a war. If it continues like this, yes, the day after tomorrow there will be casualties again, and Mr. Vance will come back and convince Mr. Trump that, no, do this and that. But the issue is, whenever you allow the Islamic Republic to sell $5 billion in oil again, Mr. Trump, that $5 billion becomes missiles and drones, or the shipment they seized today in Syria, a drone and weapon shipment for Hezbollah terrorists. The Islamic Republic is inherently and by nature evil and savage, and it must be destroyed. That's why it's better to pay the price now rather than 5 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now. It'll be the same old story.
Thank you, Arash Aramesh, a prominent legal scholar and national security expert joining us live from Los Angeles. Mr. Aramesh highlighted the complex issue of sending weapons to Syria. Iraqi authorities recently announced they are investigating the seizure of a major smuggling shipment containing weapons, missiles, and drones intercepted along the Syrian border, while Syrian officials assert that this military cargo was ultimately destined for Lebanon's Hezbollah group. Hezbollah leadership has consistently denied these claims, asserting that the organization currently has absolutely no military presence or ongoing armed activities inside Syrian territory. The Iraqi Joint Operations Command has said that by order of the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, a high committee has been formed to investigate this case, and Baghdad is coordinating with Syrian authorities to clarify all aspects of the matter. The Syrian Ministry of Interior had previously announced that this shipment included long-range missiles, anti-armor guided missiles, and drones, and was professionally hidden in a tanker carrying black oil. Jonathan Say, analyst at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, is with us from Washington. Mr. Say, it is clear that this corridor that Iran had to Syria after the fall of Bashar al-Assad, and even with the current Iraqi government, is not as easily accessible and usable for Iran as it was in the past. How difficult do you think this has made it for the Islamic Republic to equip its proxy groups, especially in Syria?
As you yourself pointed out, Tehran's presence in Syria had become one of the main pillars of both exporting the revolution and consolidating the Islamic Republic and its proxy groups, because it connected Tehran to the Mediterranean Sea through a land bridge. But with the new government in Damascus, the whole equation was disrupted. But the Islamic Republic's own need and requirement for these smuggling routes hasn't changed yet, and they are still forced to proceed from this very direction. And the new Syrian government is also currently by no means at peace with the Hezbollah group. There is constant rocket fire from that side. But two key points here are very interesting. One, the timing of when the Islamic Republic is sending weapons to Hezbollah, while Israel and Hezbollah are at war, and the central government of Lebanon has entered the picture. This situation clearly demonstrates that, first and foremost, the Islamic Republic of Iran is actively seeking to undermine the existing security agreement, a deal that is already practically dead anyway. Tehran's ultimate objective remains reigniting its long-standing proxy conflict and starting a war with Israel yet again. When we analyze the specific weaponry involved, such as advanced long-range missiles and sophisticated anti-tank guided missiles, it is obvious these arms are intended specifically for fighting Israeli forces. Finally, this situation directly connects back to U.S. foreign policy towards Syria. The Trump administration consistently wanted to pressure Jilani to deploy his forces into southern Lebanon. Now, Washington has a convenient excuse to apply significantly more pressure. And if we want to look at it from Israel's perspective, now is the best situation for Netanyahu to wait for the Islamic Republic to show itself as hostile, make a mistake, so they can tell Washington again that we, as an American ally, did not escalate tensions, and now we just have to respond, preferably in a dual military campaign from both Jerusalem and Washington.
We have very little time. Mr. Trump had previously mentioned that maybe the Syrians could have an even more effective fight against Hezbollah compared to Israel. Do you see Damascus getting involved more actively?
Right now, it's hard for them because, first, from a public relations standpoint and the Arab world's perspective, fighting under the same umbrella as Israel still has a negative connotation, especially considering that many of the groups that are now fighting under Jilani against the Islamic Republic are very Islamist. It's true that they might have had secret consultations with Israel in the past, but to openly engage in a ground battle, well, first from that perspective, and second, in terms of capability, it's very limited for them. They still need to regain their strength, and it will will be a tough battle unless Turkey actively decides to exert greater geopolitical pressure on the established structure of the Islamic Republic, thereby forcing the Damascus regime into an unwanted direct confrontation with Tehran. The most strategic option for Damascus remains to exercise restraint. By holding off for now, Syria can successfully avoid being dragged into the spiraling conflict, letting the regional war between Iran and Israel escalate without local proxy groups getting directly involved in the violence.
Thank you, Jonathan Say, analyst at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, joining us live from Washington. Just in the past few minutes, Iran's Fars news agency has announced that several loud explosion sounds were heard in the city of Ahvaz. You can follow the latest developing updates and full coverage of this breaking news on IranInternational.com. But for now, we have reached the end of tonight's 24 program. Remember, you can watch this entire